Yes. Yes.
Okay, that's better?
Yes, it's better. How are you,
Oh,
Lawrence?
oh, good, good.
Yeah, how is Florida?
Florida's nice right now. The weather's we don't have much cool weather. It's maybe 80 degrees, so it's not too bad.
Yeah.
I only been to Turkey once. I just was in the airport. I would have liked to have gone to see some of the mosques and the Bosphorus and things, but I never got to do that. Someday.
Someday, yes. Yeah, exactly.
So you wanted to talk about Bob some?
Yeah, Rauschenberg and your days together in studio in Florida, I think.
Yes, yes. I so I went to Rhode Island School of Design, and my degree was in sculpture, but I had done a lot of work in the design department, and I had moved to Florida, um, and I was taking a printmaking class with Bob Peterson, who used to be Bob's companion, who set up a print shop at Edison Community College. And Bob Peterson saw my portfolio. He saw a lot of the design work. I also worked with aluminum. I made furniture, I made boats and things. And he said, Bob Rauschenberg needs an aluminum welder. And so I went out to Captiva. It was 1982, October. Bob, uh, he had an assistant show me around his property. He had about 22 acres. Bob had just come back from China, and he had his idea about the world tour, the Rocky World Tour. He had a fabricator before me, Eric Holt, who was a good aluminum fabricator, and he had moved on. And Bob said, I have big plans. I need you to help me set up shop in my backyard to help me make my art. And so Bob loved that. He was a collaborative artist. He loved working with people. And he said that, I never worked with a designer before. And so he gave me the job of making everything he wanted to do with him. And so one of the things when I was at school, there's a job for artist designers. It's called a captive fabricator. And it's somebody that works for a company and makes anything that the bosses design. And Bob liked the idea of having a captive fabricator. And so we became best friends. We loved making art together. And I never regretted any day going out there to be with him to work on things. So and the scale and the amount of work. When I first started working for Bob, he talked about people that worked before him. And so he has these books, they're called registry books, and it has photographs of all the art that he's made. It has the registry number. So let's say if he made a piece, the first piece in 1982, it'd be 82.001. They would photograph it, it'd be documented. And so everything that was made can be tracked later on. Going through the books, the amount of work that he had done before me, he was famous before I was born. And I loved his work when I was in college. And he was just, when it came to making art, he was wild and crazy. He just wanted to work and make art all the time. So it was a phenomenal, and with Bob, the first day I was there, I was nervous. And Bob was so excited about my work. You're such an artist. You've done so much. You know so many things. Like I had done glass casting and I want to do glass. I had done lots of casting, bronze, aluminum, gold, silver. Oh, I want to do bronze castings. And so he wanted to do whatever. And when it came time to what he wanted to do, being with him, making it was just a joy, a celebration. So it was, and as I was saying, the registry books, I was blown away by how much work he actually had done and how large these works were. the and it seems that, you know, his gallery was Leo Castelli. And when I started, Leo, he had all the pop stars, you know, everybody, Roy Lichtenstein, Jasper Johns, Jim Rosenquist, Andy Warhol. And Bob said, I get one show a year. I could do Andy's show or Roy, I could do Leo's show in a week. I want to fill museums around the world. And it ended up that he had filled many museums around the world with many grand shows. The Guggenheim Retrospective, it was the largest one-man retrospective ever, larger than the Picasso retrospective. And it went to 4 fine museums. It opened in New York at the Guggenheim. We had 3 locations in New York. Filled the old Frank Lloyd Wright Guggenheim. There was a place called the Ace Gallery. We had the Quarter Mile painting. And there was also a Soho Guggenheim at the time. And Bob had much more work than that. You know, it's just, I made over 5,000 works with Bob in the 26 years that I worked with him. And little things and giant, the Quarter Mile painting I made with Bob. And it was all done out in Captiva. We set up to produce on a scale all the ROCI shows, the 11 countries he went to. Everything was made in this studio in Captiva. So it was a race.
Yeah. It's amazing, yeah. And I think the person you work with sometimes cross with your life at the point. Do you think that you affect him or maybe change his mind?
Well, you know, as I said, he was a collaborator. You know, it was like true love. You're with someone and it's all about sharing and caring. And, you know, he lived a gregarious life with lots of people. He was a wild and crazy gay alcoholic. He had a savant genius kind of a mind, and he was just curious about everything. You know, what does this taste like? Oh, what is this? And so he always wanted new. He wanted new ideas. He wanted new things. In some ways, my education was almost just perfect for what he wanted to do. At RISD, you know, a lot of people, you know, you go to the sculpture, people say, okay, get the yellow pages and figure out how to make things in your city. When I was at RISD, we had the Thompson registers, which were 36 volumes, 2,000 pages each of everything that was made in the country and overseas. And it's for industry to find pieces and parts of what you want to make in the world. And so I ordered the Thomas registers for Bob. And so he would come up with an idea. I'd get the books and I'd start looking, I'd start calling people. Bob had an accountant, Reuben Gorowitz, in New York, and Reuben had it lined up that Bob was rated on Dun and Bradstreet, how valuable he was. And so I would call up a company and I'd say, we want to work with your material. And they would say, well, we'd like to look you up and see what we can. I said, we're rated on Dun and Bradstreet. And then the next day they would call me up, what can we do for you? And they would send samples, they would send things. And Bob had deep pockets. He could buy stuff, but it wasn't just frivolous. Like he would do something, we would buy a certain amount of material and he'd use it up on that series. And then he'd move on. And so, and he also worked with all the print edition houses in America that were the big ones, like ULAE, West Islip, New York, Gemini, GEL out in Los Angeles, graphic studio, which became Saftec, and that was in Tampa. And whenever Bob would do these editions, they'd be printing money with his pictures on it. And he would get to work with all these printmakers that were talented artists that knew all sorts of things. And so Bob would go to do an edition, and he would figure out what people knew, what materials were going on at that time, and then he would play with that kind of stuff to do his work.
Yeah. Rather than separate his private life and art life, he was running it together, I think.
Oh, everything was together. And he always, you know, Bob is a very passionate man. He always had a companion. His companion was always with him, working with him, traveling with him. A lot of the passionate enlightenment of living kind of comes from your relationship with life. And it, you know, a lot of his energy about caring and sharing came from being a lover of all things in some ways. And also Bob was very evolved, like his Rocky tour, the cultural overchange, where he went to different countries. Bob believed that art was universal and that people are different, and that's the exciting thing. It's like people that do the same thing, you know, it's almost like somebody marries somebody that looks like his sister. You know, you want difference, you want to learn. And when you run into a culture that's totally different, it's enlightening, it's exciting, you know, and you know, you don't understand the religions, you see, but you feel. Yeah, there's something that you feel about being on this planet, that we're all evolving, and the arts seem to help people evolve. You know, Black artists, gay artists, women, of course. You know, it's everybody is making the world better through the arts. And it seems that when you look back in time, the arts is like the best way of getting a feeling about where the people were, what they were doing with what they had, in a way that you kind of understand. You know, it's, even though you can't read the language or know you just get a feeling about who they are through what they valued as being important.
Yeah, so, exactly. Totally agree. So sometimes you admire an artist, and the more you get to know it, the more you admire. Did it happen to you with Rauschenberg?
It was funny.
Because sometimes the opposite happens too.
Yeah. I was crazy about Bob when I was young, and I had an art history professor, this Bert Chernow, and he used to have a big beard. He smoked a pipe while he would show slides, and he was crazy about Rauschenberg. And he said that he's one of the hardest artists to understand, but once you get what he's doing, it's like really important. It's really enlightening for what matters on this planet. And also it's interesting because when I was at RISD, the last book that I read in my art history class was Off the Wall with Calvin Tompkins. And a lot of people like this book on Bob. It tells the art world. Calvin was the art critic for the New Yorker, and he kind of made up what art critics were. He'd go to see shows. Duchamp, he wrote a book on Duchamp. He got quite a few books. And the Calvin Tompkins, the end of the book, it's 1978, and Bob is sitting on the beach with Calvin Tompkins on Captiva, talking about life and art. When I went to talk to Bob, you know, I knew this book real well, and I knew a lot of stories about Bob. And Bob was happy that I knew about him. Bob was happy that I knew of his work and I had knew of things. and that I liked. And so I could talk to Bob about Bob. And that was one of the special things, because Bob wanted me to know everything about him. You know, he wanted me to keep things secret, because what we were making at the time, he didn't want other people making Rauschenbergs. So all the stuff that was going on in the shop, I was like James Bond. Nobody knew what was going on, but you know, we were making things, and trucks were leaving full of art, and no, you know, Bob and I stayed true love for our whole life long, you know, and in some ways, one of the best things that I could do for Bob is later in life, after he broke his hip, he had his stroke, and he was pretty depressed about a lot of things after September 11. You know, there was just, you know, he wanted to make the world better, and he was like, you know, how can I do something that's so important to make things better? And I was glad that I could support him when he didn't feel like continuing, but I kind of helped convince him that he's got to leave his body, get in the studio, and keep making art. And almost 7 years after, he kept working. And to be there, you know, for him to say, what can I do? You know, how can you? And there was a few teary late nights when he would hug and kiss me, saying, please don't ever leave me, you know. And it was one of those things. It was like a father, a mentor, and it, you know, he also used to proposition me. It was one of those things. When I started working for him, my sister was 5 years older, and she had lots of gay friends, and I grew up with gay babysitters, and it was like I understood that people are people, and that we love one another, we care for one another. Some of the most interesting people were his gay friends, and so Bob loved this. When I first started, he wanted to know day one, what do you think? And that, oh, my best friends, a friend E-Rock, I drove to San Francisco with him, and we were together for a while. And Bob wanted a relationship with me, but the way that I was hardwired, I was dreaming of goddesses. You know, it just wasn't what I was attracted to or wanted to. And so it was almost charming how he would proposition me through the years. But it was, you know, Bob, I'd be gone tomorrow. So, you know, I love you by making your art with you, not by our relationship. So it was, yeah, and I knew way too much about his romantic life, because he trusted he could talk to me, you know, and that to have a confidant, you know, someone that you could support. You know, we talked about everything. It's rock and roll, religion, anything was. And he, in some ways, he was very demanding. He wanted to know everything that you know, and that to have no fear, to be open and honest, you know, and he was, you know, one of the most special artists that ever lived on the planet. And he had this little sidekick guy that helped him make stuff. One of my favorite things, when Bob did the quarter mile painting, this is the quarter mile book for when I went to China. I didn't go to China. When the Rauschenberg Foundation took over, they gave me a 2-week notice. They said he's not going to be making any more art, and I didn't get any retirement. So it's kind of okay. And they really, they didn't want to hear all the things that Bob told me through the years. They want to tell the story their way, and they're in charge. They never knew Bob, you know, they were business. And so all these, and Bob wanted me to take care of the art after he's gone. He wanted me to make sure that I talk to people. This is important. People need to know this. But so back to the quarter mile, there is a section of the quarter mile that Bob calls his army. And the army to Bob, these were people that he said he needed to make his world. The quarter mile was like a self-portrait to Bob. It's like he put everything into it. And anything that he was interested was thrown into the quarter mile. And Bob is in the quarter mile, and I'm to the right of Bob.
Wow.
So interesting, because the way that he did his army, he had the person lay down on the panel and he drew around the body, and then he transferred images around it. I was not there when he picked out the images, but the images are really personal to me. There's really strange connections that I don't know how he would have known. And like one example, there's a baby seal printed on my image. My first girlfriend, she really loved seals, and it was a connection to her, which, you know, how he never knew that story, he never knew anything about that. So someone that has all these images from around the world would grab something and throw it down and have a connection. It's just a mystery, a big mystery.
Yeah, it's genius.
He was connected to lots of stuff, you know, and also we talked about dreams a lot. He would get all excited. One morning he said, "Get over quick. I just had a dream." And I went over and he said, "I just had a dream of a clear glass car tire rising out of clear water. I want to do glass car tires." And we did glass car tires. And it took a while, and we did it. I brought him a whole bunch of tires, and he, "Oh no, I don't like the brand tire. Oh no, it's not worn enough." And there's a guy that was working on building his new studio, and he was going to get new tires. And I looked at his old tires, and I said, "I want one of those." The name of that tire was called Star, and Bob had a husky named Star that was with him. And Bob saw that tire. He said, that's the tire. And so we molded it. We had glass blowers connected to Dale Jahuli. Dale Jahuli, I knew at RISD, said, "Oh, this guy is really good." And so we made a bunch of glass car tires. And I would tell him my dreams, and he would tell me his dreams. And it just seems like we were getting information about stuff. This was a dream I had after Bob died. I had a dream. Bob was young and healthy. He was in the kitchen, and he said, "I want to give you this. This is your 67th birthday." And it was a Coke bottle that's broken with a Statue of Liberty stuck inside of it. After I had the dream, I decided I wanted to make the dream. When I went to the Rauschenberg Retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art, I bought this Statue of Liberty at a store in New York City. I bought a Coke bottle. I had to cut it with diamond wheels to get it to look like it was busted, that it would fit in. But I'm 64, and in the dream, Bob says, "It's your 67th birthday present." So and there's many, you know, I was so close to him. I dream things all the time, and I still dream of Bob, and we're still doing work. And so I usually try to make those dreams when they pop up, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And he was criticized for a time, like erase the Kooning. How he deal with people?
Yeah, in some ways, you know, Bob could deal with people so well, and he could read people so well. And he was just more than normal, like when you would be dealing with him. And you know, the de Kooning stories that erased de Kooning, everybody loves that. And I heard Bob tell it to many, many people because they, oh, tell us the de Kooning story. But it seems like Marcel Duchamp knocked the doors off the museums. Bob blew the walls down. He just shook up what is art, why do we make art? And you know, and his friends were the movers and shakers of the century. Like when he was at Black Mountain College, John Cage, Merce Cunningham, you know, they started working together. So John Cage was changing the musical world. What is Western art? What is music? And Merce Cunningham changing what is dance? What is, and Bob, you know, what is art? And those three together are my big heroes. And getting to know the three of them is, you know, is just crazy. I made musical instruments. I like Laurie Anderson a lot when I was in college. And I used to make experimental musical instruments, kind of a la Laurie Anderson. And John Cage was inspiration to me. And so these people were in Bob's life when I showed up. Like Bob's friend Trisha Brown, he did a stage set for Set and Reset, a big dance piece. Laurie Anderson did the soundtrack for it. And it just, you know, Bob did a little drawing. I'm going to make this stage. And I said, how big is it? Oh, it's 36 by 11 feet. And so I welded up this aluminum frame to Bob's little drawing. And then we go to New York to see Set and Reset premiere. And I had Laurie Anderson's tape with me, Big Science. And I don't know if you know it, but there's a song in there about an airline pilot gets on the radio and it's Laurie Anderson's voice. I had my little cassette recorder and I had it with me on the plane. We're flying to New York. And I said, Bob, have you listened to much of Laurie Anderson's stuff? And he said, oh, no, not that much. And we're about to take off. I gave him my cassette recorder and he puts on the headphones and the song goes, this is your captain. We're about to attempt a crash landing. And Bob afterwards said that was perfect. It was great. And then to see the dance performance, and then Bob had a big party at his place at 381. John Cage was there, Merce Cunningham was there, Trisha Brown, Laurie Anderson, and just celebrating making art together. You know, they were at the opening and now they're at the party. So it was, you know, and it's good to be in Bob's tribe. You know, I was a crazy kind of kid. My parents came from Czechoslovakia to America. I was in Bridgeport, Connecticut. My mother never taught us anything about Czechoslovakia. I think she was afraid of being considered German after World War II. She was, you speak the language of the country you live in. And so I grew up knowing nothing about my roots, knowing nothing about where I came from. And I started to get into the arts. I was at high school, I met this Black artist, Ben Johnson. He came to our high school and they had a cultural art center in downtown Bridgeport. And it was for kids that didn't have stuff. And he brought his music and he started playing. Ben was like 6'5", big guy. And he said, I want you to all come to the art center and make some art. I went to the art center and one of the teachers was from the Art Students League, Bill Collins. Ben studied under Wayne Thiebaud when he's in California. They would give you art supplies and tell you just do this, do that. Ben used to take me to New York to go through Soho to see the shows. He would take me into the projects. He'd bring paints to friends of his that needed paints. And I was this little white kid and he was taking me into these projects and I was seeing the most amazing art. I decided to be an artist because of Ben. And so I was a wild and crazy guy. I went to San Francisco Art Institute. I went around and I was making art. And then I decided I wanted to go to RISD because the Talking Heads had been there and the music. I showed up at RISD, I got in at RISD, and then the year I graduated, I started with Bob. And so Bob was like, I want you, I need you to help me. So that was my, the tribe that I belonged to, that dancing, music, conceptual art. I found a home. I need you. I want you. I mean, what a gift, great time. Life in the art, traveling the world, really good stuff.
Great times. Yeah, you're so lucky.
I feel lucky. I feel lucky. Right now, I'm not doing well. I have a hard time paying my bills. I have to keep hustling. I got a garage full of trash, and I might lose that rent, and I don't know what to do with all that stuff. But I'm still alive. I'm still well. I know lots of stuff. I'm doing stuff.
Exactly. So, but if you had the chance, to work with him, returning to those days, what would you like to do or change?
No, I wouldn't change anything. I think change is every day. Change is right now. Bob wanted me to talk about how we did things, and he explained how we wanted me to talk about the art. He didn't want me to say, oh, this means that, this means that. He wanted the knowledge of how to make things to continue so that others could continue. I thought that I was going to get retirement. I thought that I was going to be in better financial shape. Bob wanted me to teach what I had learned. I wanted to set up a place where we could do everything for others. I wrote this thing. It's Bob after Captiva. I wrote, it's like an illustration what Captiva could be. And I gave it to the directors and stuff. And I made 22 copies of it. And in it, it was like I wanted Captiva to be a place where artists could come from around the world to make the world better. So the idea of making a place that we could make anything, I wanted to be a part of that because I had, the abilities of doing lots of things. I gave that book and they said, you think it's all about you. You think you made all the work. Well, it's not. He's not making any more work. Here's your 2-week notice. So I still want to continue to teach the Rauschenbergian way of making things. And I like to work with new people that have new ideas that I'd love to set up a foundry. I know lots of casting techniques that are crazy. I'd like to work with people like Kara Walker. I think her work is great. The stuff that she has at the Tate Modern and stuff. I'd like to see monuments made today that really are important, that really mean things. And it's, I'd like to see monuments around the world to who they are. Why are they important? Working with people and having them be the authors of their stories. I'd like to be the fabricator that helps pull off the monuments.
So what kind of task would he give to you?
In the very beginning, Bob was doing these transfers on a transfer press. He was working on panels. The press was 37 inches wide, 8 feet long, and he was transferring his images onto these panels. And a man, Tim Farr, had done this piece. It's called Rodeo Palace with Bob, and he was a fine woodworker, carpenter, and Bob had multiple panels, and so it was like he could build a house as big as it could get. And Bob liked that he could do these really big things, and he would have objects like his combines coming off of it. So when I started working with Bob, he asked me, "What do you think of this, kid?" He did this piece for China, and it had these 2 umbrellas. It had images transferred, and I had studied Bob's work in school. And knowledge of materials and sustainability was important. I had a teacher that talked about Rauschenberg was doing transfers, but the inks themselves will fade in time. They're not light fast. It's made to be inside of a magazine, a book. When you put it down, you hit it with radiation, in time it's going to be fading out. So I told Bob that, and he said, well, what wouldn't fade? You know, what would last? And I said, well, your silk screens from the 60s were true pigments, and those paintings were made to last. And indoors, those true pigments will last. And he said, all right, let's set up silk screens again. I want to use my own photography. And this was in 82, 83. And so we brought Larry Wright in from New York, who was a silkscreen artist teacher. And Larry helped set up the type of emulsions, the type of screens, also to use golden acrylics, heavy body golden acrylics as our printing medium. So, and then you wash it out quickly with a power washer. So I built a table 12 feet by 24 feet that had cushioned top, that was ultra flat so that you wouldn't pick up any printing marks. And I built the light table to expose the screens. I'm a designer, I make things. What do we need? You make what you need to make. And I made a stretching machine that stretched real fast, because Bob would travel somewhere, shoot 100 rolls of film, come back, pick 200 images, and we'd have to race to make all these screens. And so whatever and then he'd work and it wouldn't go fast enough. The paint was taking too long to dry. So he had me make drying lamps to go over this. And then he needed another one. So I had 2 drying lamps that would dry the art, because we would do 5 or 6 big paintings a night. And also when he started with his ROCI Mexico show, he was working on canvas and paper, and he wanted to do a piece, and he brought back stuff from Mexico, and he had a pierced tin lamp that had a Lady of Guatemala. Somebody took nails and pierced it, and you would put light behind it. He didn't like it because it was all rusty. I bought some stainless steel sheet metal that was thin, and I marked every single hole, and I pierced it through, and I brought it to him, and he says, I don't like it. It looks like a cheese grater. So I spent quite a bit of money on that stainless steel roll. I cut a piece of the stainless and I put it on his table. I said, Bob, I worked for a sign painter. You can work on sheet metal instead of canvas or paper. That night, Bob did a piece for Terry Van Brunt, his companion, on that stainless steel. In the morning, he says, how big can we get stainless steel? And I says, I can get 4 by 10 foot sheets. And he says, buy a dozen sheets. And he started a series of paintings called Shiners, where he silkscreen printed on stainless steel sheets. We started working on sheet metals. We did lots of sheet metals, all kinds of stuff. So some of my favorite works were done like that. And then I came up with the idea. I was buying scrap metals at the scrap yard, and there was a brass sign, and it was varnished on the front to keep it shiny, but the varnish dripped down the back of it, and it had beautiful patina, but it had clean drips. And I had the idea that we could silkscreen print with varnish, and Bob could paint with patinas. And he did a series called Borealises on brass, bronze, and copper using that technique. And it's just chemicals and varnish and metal, and they're beautiful. And then I found another chemical, Alumablack, that changes aluminum to black, and we printed with varnish, and then he used the chemicals to do this. This is a small one I did. So that's not paint, that's chemicals. And it's just an image done with chemicals rather than paints. Those are called night sights. And Bob, those are beautiful. Any big ones kind of stuff. So that's the kind of stuff, whatever, every day, Bob, the day that I met Bob, we talked and talked and talked. He was drinking Jack Daniels, I was drinking beer, and Bob Bob he didn't want to stop. He just wanted to keep talking. And he said, I want to do this every day. Before you leave, let's talk. When you show up in the morning, let's talk. And so what his day was, what do you need? What do you want? What are we doing? And I was his captive fabricator, whatever he wants, cool. And I like the relationship where I'm not great. He's great. I love whatever he wants to do. And so the little tiny things were the special things, everything was special. Anything he did was special. And that's what life is. It's kind of everything is special. If correctly viewed, everything really matters.
I watched a lot of documentary about Bob. He loves so much. He had a muse wall in studio, I think. What kind of objects, including this muse wall of Bob?
Well, it's funny. I even have some muse wall things that I have. Bob let me have a few things.
Maybe pebbles.
The muse wall was when he did a lot of the transfer stuff, and that was in his print shop. He bought the print shop. It was funny because Bob Peterson, who was with him, was a print. Bob went to Gemini to do a print edition project, and Bob Peterson was this handsome, good-looking printmaker. And Sid Felston, the head of Gemini, when he came to Captiva, he told me a story that, we were doing this print edition project. Bob showed up, and Bob Peterson and Bob didn't show up the next day. Bob Peterson went back to Captiva with Bob, and they bought this house that was at the end of this jungle road. They called it the print shop later, and it had a 4-car garage where they bought the presses and set up. And there was this mysterious, cool lady, Maybelle Stomper, who lived next door to the print shop. And they went to the post office, and the little island way back then, there was a little note, printing press. They got in touch with the person, printing press. It was Maybelle next door was selling her litho press to the bill they just bought to set. It was like magic. That how often is there a litho press next door to you on an island? And so I don't know, I go off on tangents, but that's Bob Peterson set up Untitled Press was the name of their business, and that was because Ileana Sonoben were in on what should you call your business. And Ileana was saying, everybody does these untitled artworks. If you call yourself Untitled Press, they'll think you make everything.
Sure.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. And I worked 29 years, so all my paychecks were Untitled Press. So it's kind of an interesting thing.
It's exactly. And his support for young artists is well known for worldwide. Have you had a moment that you have seen while working with him?
Well, he was curious about what was going on all the time. And he subscribed to all the art magazines, and so we always had the magazines around. Bob was a magazine junkie, and so Art News, Art in America, Art Forum. He always kept up with what his buddies were doing, and he liked to see what was going on, and he was inspired. And it's one of those things about Picasso says, artist. There's something about great artists steal or something. He's got some kind of a quote, like bad artists rob, great artists steal. There's some kind of quote. You get ideas from everybody. You get ideas from anything. And the pop artists got ideas from people making soup cans. It's where ideas come from, where things are, what do they mean to you, and everything is personal and different to everyone. The importance of things, and it seems that we're all on our own journey, and what we feel is the most important thing is what we should be kind of headed towards. But you always get distractions, you always have. And Bob loved mistakes, he loved problems, he loved things didn't work, it's like, what am I going to do now? And he loved the, we've got this, how we can fix it, and that, that was part of the being here, the living and life. It's always something with life, all these things happen at all these times. And what are you going to do now, Bob? And he would do something. So and that's, he did like young, healthy artists running around too. He supported lots of young artists, and he liked them around. He loved, he loved people at openings, and he loved dealing with everybody. And it was kind of funny because a lot of the dealers would be kind of pissed because they'd be bringing in these billionaires and all these and Bob would be talking to the bartender. Bob would be talking to the janitor. Everyone was equal, and he loved that. And you could tell that when he was talking to you. I would be at openings, and then I'd be walking around, and somebody would say, "I just had the best conversation." And Bob really liked that I liked bromeliads, and so he could figure out what people liked and what they wanted in ways, he was just a really good judge of people.
It's almost done. Really great to see you and talk to you. It's great conversation. Yeah, Lawrence. Thank you so much for your time today.
I'm glad that you like Bob. I feel like I'm still connected to the whole circle of Bob kind of thing. So and he did, what his art was about was really about the whole world coming better, and caring and sharing, and he thought art was the way to do that. And at the end of the day, he said, I was just an artist. It's one of those things. I think there's a quote that that I could, the Calvin Tompkins book, actually at one point when Bob was down and out and didn't feel like working, I took this book out and I read this to him. And this is at the end of the book. They're sitting on the beach, and Calvin says that, and he had a quote. He goes, Duchamp had spent the last 20 years of his life patiently assembling a work of art that could be seen by only one person at a time. I'm nothing else but an artist, I'm sure, and I'm delighted to be, Bob told the interviewer in 1963. When I mentioned this remark to Rauschenberg that day on the beach in Captiva, he looked up, as he often does, overjoyed. That's so wonderful, he said, nodding repeatedly and smiling. That's so wonderful, I'm going to pretend that I said it myself.
Really great.
Well,
so great.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, Lawrence.
Good luck with your art and your endeavors and your talks as you go along.
Thank you so much.
And send me some of your art. I'd like to see some of your art.
Yeah, thank you so much. I will send you.
Fare thee well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.